tool, apart from those economic impact tools, all of that stuff is publicly available. So usually we have a couple of councillors in the room, and it's a bit of an eye-opener for them and the mayor to realise ratepayers can get access to all of this information and can know this about how your region is performing, which is a bit of an eye-opener that is all publicly available. I have to say, out of all the councils across our region, or I look after 10, you guys actually use this tool the best. Like comms team use it. Like we're trying to teach the other team, do you know comms anymore? No. I got that look. So like the mayor and his team and the CEO and the comms team always would use it really well, and they would come to ECDev and say, we're going to do this presentation on energy. What data have you got? Not all the, it's like a lot of the other councils mainly only use it for their funding applications. So part of this tour is to actually teach them how good you guys do with it, because you actually do, you're one of the best at actually using it for all those other things like presentations and investment attraction and communications and certainly your funding applications. All right, I'm going to hand over to Kat and let her go from there.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just talk you through a little bit about what's happening at that national and state level. And it's just a presentation that we've been going out and giving to councils all over Australia pretty much about the current status of the economy, simply because it helps you guys to make decisions. In Queensland, we're in a bit of a unique position because our economy is actually performing really well in most parts. We've got some things happening in our favour around migration and stuff like that is helping to sustain our economy. So Trudy talked about the site. This is what it looks like on the homepage of the economic profile. There is so much data in these sites. You've got the community profile, which talks about all of your census information. Then you've got the economic profile, which has over 1,100 pieces of data in it about all of your industries and everything like that. So if you're looking for a demographic or an economic story, this is where you're going to find it for your region. So it's really important as council staff to just know that it's there.
One thing and then it's something else.
I tell you. Yeah, there we go. The lead up to COVID-19. So we're just looking at the whole of the RDA region in the slides at the moment, but we can see leading up to the COVID fallout, the economy was performing actually really well. And since 2000 and even 2015, we saw some really nice growth in the region, in the Darling Downs region overall. And we also saw that in terms of jobs since 2015. We saw just a little bit of stagnation, and then we see the economy growing. And then we had that COVID year, which has really led to a big fallout in terms of jobs, but certainly has been mixed results across all of the industries. We've had strong growth in ag, health, construction, retail has had a fall away, accommodation, anything that was affected by visitation and things like that. Certainly we saw fallouts all across the country, but those areas that have a nice healthcare and social assistance network or public service tended to perform a little bit better because those jobs were much more secure than in some of those other areas. Many economic development indicators were heading in the right direction, which is also lucky because those economies that weren't performing very well before the crisis were really hit very, very hard. And places like when you look at Douglas or the Whitsundays really fell quite dramatically during the storm, I guess. So positive growth since 2012. Unemployment rate has consistently been below the regional Queensland level in the Darling Downs Southwest region, and building approvals have been strong year on year. And this year we were just looking at Toowoomba's data before, and their construction and building approvals are much higher than any other year over the last 5 years. So it's interesting, mainly led by residential building approvals as well. And certainly that feeds into that whole housing shortages, housing crisis, social housing argument as well. But COVID had a major impact on this region in that first quarter. So that March to June quarter, when there was a lot of uncertainty, there was lockdowns, there was border closures, of which now we're starting to see some of those things pop up. And until we get the vaccine rollout done and right, we're going to see more of that, and that will impact parts of our region. In that quarter, gross regional product fell by 396 million in Darling Downs Southwest. Our local jobs fell by 5,593, and our job seeker recipients increased by 6,121. And I'll show you where to find that information on that job seeker data. That is new information that we've been given access to that we weren't previously allowed to access. So there are some new little modules on there that I think are quite clever. And the thing I really like about job seeker information is it's month on month, and it is over-the-counter payments. So there's no labour force survey, there's no discrepancies in, it's a smaller area, so we're a bit worried about whether the statistics are right. This is real numbers and talking about people who are accessing benefits from their home address, okay, which would be in the Western Downs.
And can you filter?
You can filter
within town areas, regions, or is it more?
No, you can filter. You can filter. You could do that if you had the. This is where you go from an RDA drop down to a full council profile. You could filter by region. What you could filter by at the moment is the difference between youth allowance and job seeker. So if you had, for example, a grant application that was focused on youth unemployment, whether it be, or it might even be about skills and training, you may want to split that job seeker information into youth allowance recipients versus job seeker recipients, because I think youth allowance under 25s or under 21s or whatever, whatever that component is, you can split between those two areas, which the Sunshine Coast does it for their areas. So they split that data every month. They get us to send the spreadsheet so they can look at what's happening in terms of their youth unemployment and how they can look at training those youth unemployed, because it's very difficult to get those people back into work once they've been on a job seeker in the assistance for a longer period of time. So it certainly is something that we can do. Anything like that you think to yourself, I wouldn't mind looking at job seeker information by SA2 or, those smaller areas or things like that, just drop us a line and certainly we can look into it, because you would have to pay for that data. We wouldn't have to pay for it. So it'd be, and we'd just pass it on to you in spreadsheet form. So anything that you need like that, we can get that for you.
Best email for any of those is that admin@rda-ddsw.org.au.
Yeah.
Go, Tim.
Yeah. Tim's onto it. So the tourism economy was hit hard in Queensland, which is no surprise, simply given, you can see here, any of those really deep, dark red areas had dropped more than 5% in employment, which was quite scary in some of those places, Cairns in particular. I was actually there when they shut the airport, and that was kind of a bit frightening, Cairns, Townsville, where I live in Livingstonshire, any border locations that had those problems with cross-border activity was certainly hit very, very hard during that initial period. However, support, that's one thing, support has been unprecedented through this federal government in order to be able to support people. So Queensland has benefited from the exodus from Sydney and Melbourne in late 2020, and it is a real opportunity for regions to take advantage of movers, but not just from Sydney and Melbourne, but also movers out of the major cities like Brisbane, Sunshine Coast or Gold Coast. So the people moving out of those localities who no longer have to work in those locations full time to fulfill their jobs. So for lifestyle destinations and destinations where, you get a simpler life, but you've got primary schools, high schools, you've got the whole, package deal in terms of, life cycle, it's a real opportunity. And we can see there in the December quarter, where we actually thought we would see a slowdown between September and December, we actually saw an increase in numbers of people moving out of Sydney and Melbourne. One thing I will say, though, is your net migration for a lot of these areas is only slightly increased. What we're seeing is, yes, we are seeing slightly more people moving in. What we're seeing less of is people moving out of the regions, which is putting pressure on housing, okay, because we don't have that churn. Traditionally, Queensland has a bit of a churn that happens, particularly in regional communities. We are not seeing that churn. We are seeing a lot more people stay in their towns that would have traditionally moved, when we look at our young people moving on to universities, they've stayed at home for an additional year or that sort of thing. So certainly it's something to look at. Lots of housing market challenges across all of regional Queensland. So I think Brisbane City is the only LGA that does not have a very tight market at the moment. That is it. So everywhere else are certainly suffering in terms of rentals, as well as housing shortages for workers.
I think some of that is because people aren't confident to invest in something new.
Yeah, I do. I think there's also a lot of pressure on the construction sector at the moment. I mean, you know, in where I live in Yeppoon, you can't get a builder for 12 months. You know, it's even difficult to find a block of land. Councils are struggling with the ability to do things quickly to respond to this market, which is, you guys work in the machine. It isn't as easy to be able to say, okay, we need to, you know, do these things to, you know, help support people who can't find housing. There is, you know, this transition to regional areas as well. You can see it, you can feel it on the ground, you know. So it does put a lot of pressure on regional areas who aren't used to that kind of activity. So the economic outlook, Australia's economic recovery is well underway. So we did not predict that, you know, certainly we would have a recovery that would happen as quickly as it did, but certainly job seeker payments and things like job keeper payments and things like that help to keep the economy alive. Queensland is absolutely leading the Eastern Seaboard recovery. Our investment in housing, you know, renovations, our household expenditure has been quite confident and quite strong, with people spending perhaps what they traditionally would have spent on holidays now moving into you know, expenditure on homes, and with the home builder scheme and things like that, it's also helped. So we've got 52 billion was provided in the June quarter, 31 billion in JobKeeper, 16 billion in boosting cash flow, and the home builder scheme, which has made a massive difference to our economy. Household spending, as I said, and exports behind the rebound. So certainly household consumables, you know, I mean, you just had to go to particular shops and see complete sellouts. And I was living in Brisbane at the time, complete sellout of, you know, toilet paper, computers, you know, to get monitors, to get all of these things that we suddenly needed, office equipment, office furniture, you know, people getting pools. I know the guy, I was chatting to a guy in Yeppoon, he was saying, you know, last year we did 200 or something pools, and he said every year before that we averaged between 60 and 70, you know, and like, that's crazy, you know. So it's been a really interesting transition, a really good opportunity for some businesses, and for others not so good. So certainly thinking about what those changes are. So here I'm just talking about managing the change. So, you know, beyond 2022, regardless of what we're experiencing in Queensland, you know, there will be a change to Australia's projected population. And basically what has fueled Australia's economic growth leading up to now has been international migration, whereas that has stopped. Our closed borders, we had our first negative population growth ever since World War II last year. So we can see here our closed borders will impact economic growth, 1.9 million less people by 2041, which has an impact on demand for goods and services, fewer students, which we're already seeing the impact of that in the likes of the you know, places like Melbourne and Sydney, and also skilled migrants as well to take up some of that shortfall. I live in central Queensland. The shortfall in the mining sector at the moment is absolutely being felt. It's really, really interesting. But we will benefit, if, particularly if Victoria's economy doesn't bounce back. It's notorious that when Victorian economy is not performing as well, Queensland seems to, you know, up the ante in terms of domestic migration. So certainly that is a good opportunity for us, and we will see some benefit from that. Also, 3/4 of industries work could be done remotely, and we are seeing that shift to more you know, work from home activities. And you can see that by, we've been doing some monitoring for Scenic Rim around work from home in their locality between Scenic Rim and Brisbane, and what that means for them, what that means for their roads, what that means for public transport, all of that sort of thing for places like the Scenic Rim on the fringe of the CBD. The need to respond to market changes quickly will increase. You know, thinking about training your staff and what skills you need internally now is very different. Even places like I was in Douglas not long ago, and the need for chefs, hospitality workers, that sort of thing is through the roof. They cannot fill positions, which is a really interesting position for them, partly because one, they don't have the skills, but also they don't have the accommodation for them to stay. So really thinking about what that means for local council as well, capturing a share of the domestic tourism economy and thinking about where that domestic tourism economy is coming from. So obviously we have issues with borders with Victoria and New South Wales. Darwin went into lockdown last week for 3 days. So thinking about that intrastate travel and how to take advantage of those people that are ready to travel, and where is that greatest market for the Western Downs? What does it look like? What activities can they participate in? How long can they stay for? What are our best businesses? All of that sort of thing. So making sure that, and connecting industries together. So one thing the Scenic Rim did very well was they developed a program. It was called the Farm Box, or the Scenic Rim Farm Box. And what they did was they basically got all of their producers together and they developed what they call the Scenic Rim Farm Box, and you could order food to your front door in Brisbane. So they captured the Brisbane market, they advertised it throughout Brizzy. They did, radio advertising and commercial radios and things like this. And when you got sent your farm box, you also had all this material in there about tourist product that you could do on the Scenic Rim. That was day trip, where you could book that. It made it very, very simple for the Brisbane consumer. And it worked very, very well. They were inundated with people. We saw their Google. We did a lot of work with them around Google Analytics. So if you go onto Google Analytics, you can actually look at how many people are in your parks, recreation, all of that sort of stuff, because it just picks up the Google thing on your phone. So it was a really, really good way of being able to engage people who traditionally perhaps had not thought about the Scenic Rim, but they started to put together food, fresh produce, farming, day out, day trip, put it together, and suddenly the Scenic Rim was a place to go at the weekend. So it's really interesting the way different people have done it. We also know that an Australian tourist spends a lot more overseas than what an international tourist spends in Australia. So Australian tourists tend to have deeper pockets. So it's really thinking about how you capture part of that market as well. So just some final words on this. Just taking some confidence that the region was on a growth trajectory. There was some positive signs that the economy was performing quite well. Managing the workforce moving forward is going to be a challenge, simply because different sectors are going to recover at different times. There's going to be pressure on different sectors at different times. We don't know necessarily. We don't know if there could be an outbreak in 2 weeks in Queensland and what that means for our local economy and our local businesses. Housing stock, thinking about what housing stock and housing supply we offer internally in the Western Downs, and what does that look like for council? How do we convince council and get them to understand, how important this is for workforce development, but also for just our social wellbeing. Online shopping impacting retailers, what that means, certainly for transport, warehousing, things like that. Policy cost pressure on the manufacturing sector. So if anywhere who has manufacturing, it's been such a challenging environment for them to work in, simply to get input goods, those start out goods into their production and things like that. And just the uncertainty around what's happening with COVID. Moving from recovery to expansion, confidence is certainly high, much higher in Queensland than it is in the other states. So a lot of livability surveys will tell you that Queensland's the place to be at the moment. People are a lot more confident living here. You guys are probably the same as me. I live in Yeppoon. I really have no idea half the time what's going on with COVID, except for the fact that all of my colleagues are in Victoria. But, they'll say, oh, we're in lockdown again. I'm like, oh, what's happened? So there's a disconnect for us in some ways up here from actually what's going on the ground. Industry recovery, hospitality, finding workers, the workers that left places like Cairns, Douglas, other tourist locations haven't gone back. you know, they've obviously either gotten jobs in other industries, perhaps earned more money, and just haven't returned to that sector. So thinking about how we recover their lifestyle locations, working from anywhere, this ability to work from anywhere, ensuring that you've got good connectivity, NBN, all of those sorts of things are really important. If that's, you know, ensuring that you've got it together in that respect. Domestic tourism and that population outflow from Victoria. And then, of course, it's going online and checking out and keeping up with a lot of, no, you're right, a lot of the data that you can find on these profiles. So I'm going to get this up. And what I'm going to show you, the first thing I'm going to do is, so everyone would have filled out the census. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Good. So this community profile, so our red tool, so we've got the red and the green tool. The community profile is basically that. It talks about your community, who lives here, what type of housing do they live in. It's very solid information. It comes directly basically from the census. There are a few things there that come from different sources, but mainly this is about your census. And it is what the federal government, as Trudy mentioned in the last meeting, this is what the federal and state governments use to look up and talk about the Western Downs. So they will use this information as part of assessing your grant applications and things like that, regardless of the fact that it's 5 years old at the moment. This is what they will use.
It's the best available.
It's the best available, you know, and we're actually very lucky to live in a country that does a census every 5 years.
And how long will it take for the new data?
So the new data, so August, so we fill it in August. It's usually the first drop will be between March and July. It depends on how ready the ABS is and how many glitches they get. You know, it's all different things like that. What, you know, can they find the staff at that particular time to be able to do it? I know that the ABS, we do a lot of work with them and they're very understaffed, and, you know, it's not an easy process to manage. So we would be hoping between March and July, we would have the first drop of data. Then it's normally 3 months after that, we get the next drop of data, and then we'll get the last drop of data, which is sort of your CEFA index and things like that, in about October, November, that sort of thing. So by the time it all comes out, it's normally a year has gone by.
Interesting, because you know, there weren't a lot of, you know, almost no verbatims able to be put in.
But it was interesting this year's census because you could provide a lot more detail around what you did as a job, which interests me because previously it was sort of which category do you fit in. This time it was, can you describe what you do in your job? So I'll be interested to see how that affects certain categories. You know what I mean? Particularly when you're looking at things like marketing, communication compared to professional services, compared to, you know, some of your other areas. So it'll be, I'm interested to see how that comes out in the wash. But this red tool, that represents all of your census data. And you really, for, you know, someone working in council, this is good information to just know about your community anyway. And now this is for, here I'm on the RDA Darling Downs site. I'm going to go straight to the population highlights page, because what I normally do is if I haven't visited an area, I grew up in Toowoomba, so I sort of know Dalby and, you know, coming out here playing, my brother playing football and different things like that, you know, you sort of got to know the Darling Downs really well. So, but before I go anywhere, like if I go to South Australia or somewhere like that, where I have no clue what, you know, who these people are or what the town looks like or feels like or anything like that, I'll come onto the population highlights page and I'd come on here and say Western Downs Regional Council, and I'd have a look at this just to get a feel for what type of population it is. What do they look like? How old are they? All of that sort of thing. And you can see here population 34,579, declined by 3 from the previous year. So pretty stable sort of population. We can see here median age is 37, so less than the average of the Darling Downs region, less than regional Queensland, but on par with Queensland. So we can see here Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, maybe a bit higher, you know, so you start going through these, you know, couples with children, older couples without children, lone person households. So you sort of can come through here and go, okay, well, it's not a tourist destination. It's medium and high density is quite low compared to the other areas. Median weekly rent is, you know, it's affordable. Mortgage repayments are quite affordable. Incomes are lower than the rest of Queensland and regional Queensland. Households renting is a little bit higher. So you sort of start, overseas born is low. So, you know, it's that traditional sort of Queensland white sort of community. Language other than English at home, only 3%. University attendance is low. University quals are low. So you sort of can get a bit of an idea of you know, what this community might be like and the types and styles of people that might live here. Okay, so that's the first page that I normally go to. And what I do is I normally export that in a PDF form for all of the councillors or council staff that I meet there. So, and I'll say, keep this on your desk, because when your mayor rings and said, do you know what the median income is for our council area, you're able to say it. If you've got a grant application, you're trying to prove that, well, we are, you know, our CFA index is this, or our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population is higher than other areas, you can use this to be able to compare and quickly grab those stats straight out from any of these tiles. Okay, so that's the first page that I normally go to. The next one I go to is my how old are we? Because that's significantly important for your councillors to understand the shift in the demographics of your population. It is just one of the key drivers in terms of your infrastructure development and things like that. What is the person's date of birth? So we're always going to give you that census question referring to the total population. And here we can change any of our benchmarks. So if you want to compare Western Downs to Maranoa, you're able to do that. Okay, so you can compare across to the, okay, we've got it on the benchmark area, Darling Downs. If you're going for a grant application with the state government, you'll want to change it to Queensland. So you can compare Western Downs to Queensland. You can export all of these charts and tables as well, guys. You can export them into Excel or Word. I mainly live in the charts because straight away I can see exactly what's kind of going on in your community in terms of population. You're very heavy in these areas, so we can see a very young population. So we turn around and we say to council, okay, well, there's certain things that we need to provide because we've got a higher proportion of younger people in our community than other areas. This is a great one to use if, for example, you're going for funding for a kindergarten or parks, playgrounds, bike tracks, things like that. Then
one below, it's going to be more interesting.
Yeah. Then what we want to look at is what is the change in the population. So yes, we've got this dominance in our age demographics down here, but where we're seeing our greatest amount of change is kind of that 45 plus. Even if you went straight up here, this is where we're seeing a great amount of change as well in our community. So whilst council has to provide for its dominant features in the community, it also needs to be preparing for the shift that is happening in the community as well. And that's where data and statistics, it's fine to have the beautiful, numbers that we have here, but certainly where the rubber hits the road is when we start to go, okay, this is where we're dominant as a council, but this is where we're changing as a council. So how do we provide at that young end for the people that live here now, but also think about aging in place? So how do those people that are in this category, how do we get them out to here? So how do we ensure that they stay in the community? What do we do in terms of our healthcare provision and things like that? What sort of housing and dwellings do we provide to support them living in our community? You will always get this analysis down the bottom, and you guys, there's no copyright or anything on any of that information. You can use it in all of your work that you deliver in your council reports, grant applications, and things like that as well. So that's one of the first that I go to is my 5-year age groups. The next one I like to look at is my household summary, because you've got your age groups, and then I want to start to think about, well, okay, so what are my households made up of? What do they look like? So what is the person's relationship to each other person in the household? And when we move down here, once again, we've got our data table. And then here we've got mainly couples with children, but we're not far behind in terms of couples without children. Even this lone person household is greater than the Queensland average as well. So then we want to look at, well, where's our greatest change? Okay, we've got this growth in one parent families, which is interesting. We've also got this growth in our lone persons, which was the same thing we saw in Toowoomba. And it is something that I see across across lots of regional communities is this growth in lone person households. Now that can mean different things, and I traditionally had thought of lone person household as widow or, you know, older generation, you know, older people. But now, you know, I was listening to the radio the other day and they were saying that, you know, more people, you know, more than ever we're seeing people choosing to live alone, younger people, older people. And so it's thinking about what that means for your community. So who are those people in your community? In some communities, like where I live, it can be FIFO or Dido workers. So it's thinking about, you know, but essentially the thing about lone person households is councils need to think about, well, what does that mean in terms of housing provision? What does that also mean in terms of safety, security? And if we are looking at it predominantly being older people, what kind of housing are we delivering in terms of safety and security in certain localities? So Toowoomba did a big piece on this actually around looking at their lone person households and thinking about what that meant moving forward. And how they could provide housing that allowed those people to stay there, but also provided safe housing that they could live in. So ensuring that their bathrooms were designed in a particular way that, you know, there weren't steps and things like that. So thinking about how they can age in that place as well, which I thought was really quite clever.
So can the group household be what this counts?
It could be, yeah. So group household, I think, is more than 6 in a household. You can actually, if you ever get thinking about definitions and you think, okay, I'm just not 100% sure on what that means, we've actually got things like geography notes, household composition, stuff like that. So you can come down here and drill down and actually find some of those notes. I'll just see if I can quickly find it. I might not be able to find it that
I think
quick.
group accommodation would also be like a couple of young people together, because there's like 4 bedroom, 2 bathroom homes.
And group household can also, I have a feeling that there was one that was, whether it was other or a household or group of people who make shared provision for food. A household is a group within a single dwelling. Yeah, I'll have to, yeah, I'll look into it for you, but there's specific topic notes and things like that to be able to look at to make sure you capture what that definition actually is. Yeah, specific topic notes. So you can look at that and you'll be able to see exactly what we're talking about.
Because you'd be able to get nursing homes filtered out to know how many are in nursing homes. Or
Not necessarily, because there comes a point that the ABS reaches where it can breach privacy. So it does get filtered out, but in a community like this, you would probably be able to guess in some ways.
There
Yeah.
is a Queensland government statisticians office, and they have regional profiles, and there you can see how many providers. Well, I think this is a count of individual census.
Yes.
Count of individuals. Well, in that report, that data is available.
Yeah.
So that's probably a couple of sources, but this is probably most extensive.
Yeah.
Usually,
I must say,
2 minutes on this one.
we've used the
shit.
ABS a lot when we did our library review, and we became very familiar with the site. And to see it all
Yes.
all done for you.
Oh, I
is-
know.
Is really very nice like this.
Oh,
But we were able to drill down to locations by postcodes and things like that, so we could get very specific for
Yes.
our needs, but that's not something that we do
yeah.
that often.
Using the ABS site is like a minefield, honestly. Like it's insane. I'm just going to quickly show you on this red tool because I really want to show you the economic impact model, to be honest. But this is your job seeker information. So this is new data that basically we have access to, and you can look at how job seeker data is changing over time. So here we can see from March 2020, which is prior to COVID. This data shows prior to COVID. So this is sort of what we call business as usual, 12,039 people accessing job seeker and youth allowance across the RDA region. Western Downs, 1,681. We now have 1,855 people accessing job seeker, and as each month goes by, that gets updated. So this is at June, so soon it will be July, and you'll see those figures change as you go along. So essentially, councils are looking to get back to that magic number of that March number of what they were prior to COVID. And you can see straight away if we go March to June, so we've got 174 extra. If we actually look at March to June 2020, which is that quarter, we saw 725 additional people accessing job seeker. So it just spiked, and then we've started to just see it gradually come down. But it's a good one for councillors to understand what that change is month on month. And if you do council reporting, this is a good one to throw in to say we've got 15 less people accessing job seeker in our community. So the next thing I'm going to go to is economic profile. I don't have time to run through it all because I think we've got 10 minutes. But
we might just say to the guys that are online, we've got the community session next, and in the community session, we're not doing that overall presentation. We're just spending the whole hour touring. So you are all very welcome to stay. And then we will also send to Litterbay and anyone that registered the recordings of both. So you can always watch it again later, because there'll be a bit more touring in the next hour.
So I'll go through the things the one thing about the economic profile, the community profile is all about the census. This economic profile is updated every year. Okay, so every year in January through to March, we will update our economic data. We do that on the back of the state and national accounts, as well as labour force survey, household expenditure survey, tax information, all of that sort of thing. And it's updated for the prior financial year. So it's out to June 2020 is where we're up to. Okay, so that's only taking into consideration that first COVID quarter. All right, but it's out to that. And then what we'll do is next year, we then update to the previous June. What we have introduced now is these quarterly economic indicators, which is a new function on the tool, but it allows more timely information because people are really hungry for data at the moment. They want to know what's going on. They want to know how the community is changing. We've introduced quarterly economic data, which we're updating at the moment. And you can come on here and have a look. And this is your gross regional product. And we can see exactly what's happened. So we can see you guys have had
65.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 quarters of growth. And then suddenly you've had this COVID quarter, which is $127 million worth of economic impact on your economy. And when we come down here, we can see it's just a little bit more than Queensland, that fall, very close, but certainly just a little bit more than Queensland as a whole. And you can do that for your gross regional product as well as for your local jobs. So we can look at those quarterly indicators. It's about to be updated for September, but we can even see here, since December, we've had nice jobs growth here, even since 2017. And then here we lost 662 jobs in that quarter. And our GRP drop, if you actually look at it compared to the jobs drop, wasn't quite as bad as what you would think if you're looking at how many jobs you lost, but it's about the places that you lost your jobs and also the fact that JobKeeper kept a lot of those jobs alive. So really interesting what government assistance can do. And in terms of jobs, you actually fared a hell of a lot better than the rest of Queensland, which is really interesting. So that's another good place to be able to keep a monitor on what's happening in your local economy. So that's the quarterly economic indicators. Your economic indicators, the ones you want to look at, your gross regional product overall, and this is going to take you out to 2020. So you can see since 2016, we've had this strong growth, and even despite COVID, you guys still grew during that period. So really, really, and there's lots of little places in Queensland that have done that. And a lot of those it's the industry structure and the industry makeup that has driven that. So it just hasn't fallen as hard as Queensland. And you can see still positive growth. So this is where you get your media grabs from. So you turn around and say, you know, $5.5 million in GRP for 2020. So the ones you want to look up here are gross product, local employment. So each year around sort of February, March, once we get the new data, we'll often send out an email to the likes of yourself, Leader Bay, and say, look, we're doing presentations to councils to get them to understand what's changed in their economic data over the previous year. Okay, so this is your local employment. You can see you've had jobs growth since 2017, overall jobs growth. And so a positive 2.39% change compared to Queensland at 0.86. So performed quite well. Building approvals. It's another one we like to look at just to see where we're tracking, because this can sometimes give us a good indication of what is going to happen moving forward. So here, compared to sort of your last 3 to 4 years, it's not going too bad. What happened out here? Mining.
Yeah,
we all got our
CSG.
bonuses and spent.
Yeah.
And I think what you'll see now is that there's a lot of growth due to the renewables. So
Okay.
there's massive investment in renewable industry.
Okay.
And that's why probably construction has taken over being the largest employer. at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. So we can see, but even your residential approvals are up
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, that's interesting. That's good. I'm just going to come down to the economic impact model.
So everything so far is publicly available. This is the stuff that's not publicly available. We've got the passwords to this tool, and Leader Bay has the passwords to this tool. It's not because there's anything hidden in there, it's just that you can use the tool inaccurately and maybe attach the wrong report to your grant, which will then affect your grant. This is the stuff that's not publicly available, but if you want one of these reports, you just send through, Trude, we're doing this much in construction, you know, once it's built, there'll be, you know, 6 more jobs in aged care. Can you run me 2 reports? And we would run one for the construction phase and for the operational phase.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so simple to use. It really is really, really simple to use. The hardest bit is reading the outputs. Okay, so you can run the model okay, but then people often get stuck when they go, well, which part is an indirect impact, which is a direct impact, which jobs line do I use, how do, you know, that sort of thing. So that's where the difficulty comes in. But say, for example, we are building a community centre, and we've had a couple of these go up for BBRF, and you'll come in here and you need to select your industry. If you are having trouble finding your industry, if you go on to explanatory notes, you actually get industry sector definitions down here. So you can find out what that industry sector is. Often, I remember when I was working up north, and I'd think, what industry sector is a solar farm? You know, things like that, where it's just a little bit, it doesn't exactly have a one size fits all category. So
and do one for the medical marijuana.
oh, there you go, ag.
What industry am I sticking that under?
So health?
I think I would end up going, no,
Manufacturing.
around horticulture.
Yeah,
Because
that
they
would be right
actually
too.
do it the same as horticulture. Yeah,
So-
sorry, anyway.
Sorry,
So I've come in here and I've gone to construction. Heavy and civil is like a bridge or that sort of thing. So building construction is just a, you know, a home or a, so this was a community centre. Then you come into, is it sales or is it jobs? Now, all of your construction activity is going to be in sales. Admit, yeah. Then what you do is you submit that through the model, okay? So we've got Western Downs, building construction, sales, 3.1 million. Now it's about reading the model. And this is where it does get a bit confusing, because you've got your direct. So up here, so what's basically happened with this model is we created so much information in it based on, as different grant applications came out, we went, oh, we better add that, we better add that, we better add that. And now we've sort of got this bit of piece of data that most people now are saying, Kat, I don't know what's what I put into the application, which is completely fine. So this is just your starting position. So at the end of the day, you don't really need to know that. Okay, that's just telling me you've got a building construction sector that produces $96 million worth of output, and there's 178 local jobs. Okay, so you don't really need to know any of that information. Here's your impacts on your Western Downs economy. So this is the impacts on your LGA
Of that project, for that project.
for that project. So direct impact on the building construction sector is my starting point at 3.1 million. So the total price was 3.1 million. Then I've got my industrial impact. My industrial impact is about my impacts that result from things like buying materials, and how that reverberates through the manufacturing sector or through goods and services industry, that sort of thing. So you've got your industrial impact of 0.88 million on the local economy. Then you've got your consumption impact is 0.2 million. Now, your consumption impact is all of those people that work on this project, how they consume in your community. So at the end of the day, your total impact on the Western Downs Regional Council area is 4.18 million. Okay, so you started with 3.1, you get to 4.8 million. It is 10 local jobs. Okay, the difference between local jobs and resident jobs, these are people that live here. These are jobs that are created. So 2 people will be taking up those jobs, for example, that may live in Toowoomba. Okay, and that's based on your journey to work data in those industries.
Is that during construction or the operational?
This is construction. This is just construction. So here I'm just looking at construction phase. Okay, so for the construction phase, this is my total impact on output 4.18, and my jobs are 10. I wouldn't necessarily worry about your residents' jobs. That was brought into an application when there was something in SDQ. It was for a state government grant, and they wanted to know, well, actually, how many people will live in your actual LGA? And so we had to provide residents' jobs. Then we've got this type 1 and this type 2 multiplier. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, that's just how the money moves through the economy. The higher the multiplier, the faster the money moves through the economy. Okay, and the further it goes in different communities. And this is what I guess the beauty of this model is this is based on a local government multiplier. And the reason why that's important is because a construction worker in your community will earn and spend money differently to a construction worker in Townsville or Brisbane or Toowoomba even. So you're sitting and you've got a multiplier that is directly related to your council area, which I think is really, really important, particularly in regional Queensland. Then you've got your impact on the Queensland economy. Total impact outside of the region is 0.8, because you may be using goods and services in other places in Queensland. So you may be accessing materials from Brisbane or materials from Toowoomba, that sort of thing. Total impact on the Queensland economy is 4.98. So if you are going for a grant with the state government, that's the number that you will use in terms of total output for Queensland, and 13 jobs in Queensland. Okay, so does that make sense? Same thing with Australia, total impact on the Australian economy. So the BBRF, people would have contacted us and said, Kat, can you help me? I need to know the direct and indirect impacts. The direct impact is your 3.1 million. The indirect is this industrial and consumption impact put together. Okay, so it's all about the terminology of the grants, which is why when we've actually got a grant application guide that you can download online, which is really, really helpful. It also talks about the business case of, how to support it in terms of what data you need, which is really, really quite clever. So you get all the information that you need there, and then you also get it basically provided for you in detail, all the words. So you can just basically export all of this information. So what I used to do when I was working in councils, I would have exported this into Word and taken out any information that I didn't need. I was also very careful about what I provided to councillors and the mayor about what was too confusing or what industries I used, or making sure that I also attached the industry sector definition or whatever it might be to help them to understand why I selected certain things. But you've got all of this information down below, all the way. It even shows you what where the employment is created, the extra jobs, because not all of the extra jobs are going to be created just in construction. They're also going to be in things like accommodation and food, hospitality, stuff like that. So certainly it's all there.
The impact measure, you've got their sales, like value of construction, for example. for some of our DAs, that's not necessarily revealed to us.
Mhm.
Commercial in confidence, I'm not going to tell you how much it is to build that solar farm.
Mhm.
But they generally provide those like the workers' numbers because there's
Yep.
so we can actually work out traffic. So so the impact there, you've got the jobs, and is that the jobs during construction?
So this here, what I'm showing you now. So the construction phase, the cost, just trying to think. So yes, you could, you definitely could do it by jobs numbers for, but you would still put it under building and construction.
Yeah.
So, but the ongoing phase, so say for example, for this project, they were
Building a building that could be used for machinery.
Yeah. Well, these guys had two people working in public administration out of this community centre. They were 2 additional jobs to the community. So you could put that in as 2 public administration, and the same, you will get the same level of detail on this. So except it'll be related to jobs. So you can see direct impact on the public administration sector is 230,000. Industrial impact, that sort of thing.
So you can almost cut the data to say, during construction, the $3 million close to 4 or whatever it was.
Yep.
And then while the building's actually being used for this
Yep.
purpose.
Exactly.
So
So you've got 2, because what the grant application will ask you is what is the construction phase and what is the operational phase? And this would be the operational phase and the impact of the operational phase. Whereas what I showed you previously is just that economic stimulus will end. This is an ongoing economic stimulus as such.
We need to start the next session. And for those for those online though, we have emailed to you all a link to the next session. So if you wanted to learn more, you're most welcome to stay, because we're going to skip that first PowerPoint for the community session anyway, and we're going to spend a lot more time touring both the red tab and the green tab.
If you like, I can start on the green tab, and you guys could stay for that first bit if you wanted to, and I'll just go through some of the green stuff, and then go into the red tool after that. Then I'll
run away. But do I need to sign in to be able to fiddle around?
No.
'Cause I'm
No.
also about to rewrite the community contacts where it's
Yeah, you'll be right.
which a lot of that would be very handy.
perfect.
So yeah, if I just get on
Yep.
the website.
And we're going to send you guys the link to both. So for in that second
Yeah.
hour, if you want to watch it another day, or you're watching to stay now, if that works with your current calendar, but I know you don't have committed to an hour. If you want to, you can watch that later, or feel free to stay. And for those online, the same. You should have all now gotten an email to watch the next session if you want to. But either way, you'll get the recording of it. All right, Kate and Cecil. But we're gonna get out of that and have to let some new
Thanks,
people
guys.
in.